Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 12, a deeper look into balanced dog training.
How do you feel about balanced dog training versus pure positive training?
So this one's a topic that I was really excited to bring up within balanced training was, how do you feel about this versus this? Because you and I have talked about this forever, how people in the dog training world, and some people who aren't even like trainers, I've seen some guys on YouTube who aren't necessarily dog trainers, but they're kind of like dog training commentators, that's just their little like niche. Mm-hmm. And they either stick to this side or that side, and they kind of go and slander this or that as you're too foolish and you're too idealistic, or you're too harsh and like barbaric. And the way that I feel about balanced dog training versus positive reinforcement is I want to be 100% clear. Balanced dog training includes positive reinforcement training. And I do not think that positive reinforcement training is in any way wrong or foolish. It's such a huge part of my program, and yours too, with basically every dog. Mm-hmm. And it's just the difference as I see it. It's our job to be good positive reinforcement trainers, but it's also our job to have really researched and mastered the other methods around positive reinforcement training that would help us round out a dog. Because I think that a real balanced trainer, their job is to train a dog and an owner and create a situation, as we just talked about. It's more than obedience, it's routine and socialization and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Creating a situation that is as practical and pragmatic and safe as it possibly can be. So can you take a dog and maybe, like, if time and money and stuff like that wasn't a factor, can you take a hyper aggressive dog and completely train that out of them with food? Maybe, I don't know. I personally don't think so, but I suppose it's possible. Right. Does that mean that that's the most realistic, course of action that someone should consider? I don't necessarily think so. If an e-collar can get you there faster and safer and have a certain element to it of like being fail proof, like, if the food doesn't get the dog's attention, the collar will type thing, then I think it's our responsibility as trainers to recommend to owners to absolutely maximize this dog's potential for long-term viability and safety and happiness.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I mean, just kind of like we talked about in the pure positive video, there's a lot of bad practices, pure positive, but there's also some great things. And I think one thing of balanced dog training is it definitely does pull some of the best techniques that it possibly can, some of the most efficient, some of the most proactive, some of the most engaging technique, all these great qualities that you could want in dog training. It pulls those techniques from other disciplines, right? So let's kind of go into a little bit of what operant or what balanced dog training in essence is. Okay. If you were going to ask an operant or a balanced dog trainer what it is, in essence, the difference is between pure positive and balanced dog training is we actually use all four quadrants of the operant conditioning scale. Right. So versus pure positive just uses positive reinforcement. They'll also use negative punishment. So they will remove things, as the dog to punish the dog. However, we use those as well as also using positive punishment, which is the adding of an aversive to change motivation or a decision. And then we also use negative reinforcement, which is the application of pressure. In order with the intention of removing that pressure once the learner does what we want, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's best to really teach people what the full operant conditioning scale looks like in practicality. So let's kind of go over it real quick. So positive reinforcement, as we all know, is teaching a dog to do something with the use of rewards, right? So I give the dog a reward to positively reinforce a behavior, and the likelihood of that behavior happening again in the future is higher. Now, that reward could be praise, love, toy, could be food, could be freedom, could be all these different things. However, positive reinforcement is usually something the dog likes, something that is desirable, and leveraging that to teach new behaviors. Mm-hmm. Okay. Negative reinforcement. I think this is really important to talk about right after. Negative reinforcement is what we know as escape and aversion, or pressure work, right? Which we'll hear it talked about in dog training a lot. The best way that we can kind of exemplify pressure or escape and aversion, or escape and avoidance is very simple, right? Like, how do kids learn to be responsible when they're younger, right? Most humans' behavior is based off of the avoidance of something negative, right? So like, we go to work. Most of America doesn't necessarily go to work because they like their jobs. If you like, I'm lucky to like my job, but most people go to work so that they don't go poor, so that they don't suffer a negative consequence, right? Or so that they can eat, or so that they can contribute to their family in some shape or form. So negative reinforcement is really capitalizing on pressure. So common one that we see with kids is going to be like, how do we teach kids to clean their room? Usually the parental figures will apply pressure. Pressure could come in the form of being nagging, of potential consequence, of getting confrontational. It could come in so many different forms. But pretty much the way that a kid learns to clean their rooms, or the way that they learn to turn off their parents' nagging or complaining or attitude, is by actually yielding and doing what it is that their parents or the teacher wants them to do, right? So in essence, negative reinforcement is the concept of teaching something to yield and give in, right? And if we can teach something to yield and give in, well, this now allows us to shape new behaviors that maybe that character or personality wasn't inclined to do naturally, right? So this helps us a lot in behavior modification as well. Right. Positive punishment is the simple adding of something aversive, or a consequence. We're adding a consequence to a bad decision so that bad decision does not happen again in the future. This is, in dog training, is known as the basic correction, right? There's a variety of different things it could be. And then we have negative punishment, which is the removal of something desirable from the dog. We call this the penalty rule. So very similar to how when we get caught speeding on the interstate, they don't take our car away necessarily. However, they take our money away in the form of a ticket. So this is called negative reinforcement. They're taking something away that is desirable from us to teach us a lesson or to punish behavior.
If you go fast enough, they'll take your car away.
Yeah, if you go fast enough, many times in a row, they will take your shit away. Right? So this is the full operant conditioning scale in its entirety. We have rewards, we have escape and avoidance, or yielding. We have the corrections or punishments, and then we also have the penalties, right? And we use all of four quadrants of this in a very diverse and dynamic way to be able to shape and teach behaviors, and also to be able to create systems that are easily mimicked by dog owners as well. That's very important.
100%. Yeah, I think that, but this ultimately ties into when we think of the four quadrants of conditioning. I believe, and you tell me if you agree with this, every single dog training method falls somewhere within those four quadrants. That's basically an all-inclusive approach. Now, when we talk about a multidisciplined approach in dog training, and I know that we wanted to bring this up for sure, was how positive reinforcement training in the public eye has kind of taken on a different meaning, and it's kind of become like idealized, and the word balanced has gotten a little wonky over the years too.
Yeah.
And I know that we wanted to clear the air there before we continue with the word balance. So when we consider multidisciplined approach to training, the word balance, like we talked about before, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're perfectly 50% here, 50% there, or 25 with four different methods of training. What we're referring to is you have a dog and its core issues, or a dog, let's say, doesn't have any issues like a puppy. I mean, it'll still have certain things like lack of focus and whatever else, minor issues. But then you have there's several factors in dog training that our young dog trainer friends need to keep in mind whenever you're assessing a dog and assessing a client with an evaluation for potential training clients, or writing up your programs overall if you're doing it just for your website or whatever the case. It's not just about the dog. Where the dog is right now, issues and things like that, all the core, pedigree information falls into that. What's the breed? What's the age? What's going on here? That's one thing. The other aspect to that can be the owner, because you can have two identical dogs with two very different owners looking for two very different things. That plays a huge role in the type of training you're going to do, because again, it's your job to do the best job for them in their particular household. And that changes depending on what that household looks like. That is the information that you need to start piecing together in order to kind of dial in a training program that is most efficient. And when we find that balance, it may not be 50-50. It may be 20% this, 30% this, and whatever the remaining percentage of this, 50, right? So I wanted to kind of bring that up, and I wanted to hear your thoughts a little bit on the word balance, because it has gotten a little weird, and I'm glad you brought that up, and just before we started this whole thing, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so it's funny because I'm a Libra, right? So balance is our thing. So maybe yeah, you're a Libra too, right?
Yeah.
Balance is our thing. I don't want to get into that stuff, but kind of how like horoscopes get kind of hokey and they get a little too spiritual, or they get a little bit. They're not scientific, right? The word balance over the years have kind of become this had the same interpretation, right? We always think balanced as in Zen, or balanced as in spiritual, or whatever it might be, right? Now there are some people in the industry that have kind of taken the word balanced and they've turned it into something spiritual or hokey. However, as balanced dog trainers, balance is about balancing the scale, right? Like if I were to take a dog's behaviors and good and bad behaviors and put it on a scale, and I saw that it was out of whack, how could we balance that out, right? How could we, in essence, neutralize bad behaviors and increase positive behaviors? Like, how can we do that? In order for that to happen, if we are trying to control the negative and the good behaviors, and at the same time, then that means we need to have an understanding and a competency in both how to motivate and how to, eliminate bad behaviors, right? Motivate and eliminate behavior, right? So that's the gist of that. But ultimately, the original term balanced is really just supposed to mean we don't pick a side necessarily, right? We're like that independent, right? We're not Democrat, we're not Republic, we're that independent. We both love dogs, but we're not necessarily going to pick a team per se, because we see the value of both teams. We also respect both teams, and to pick one team over the other would not be the wisest for the dog, in our opinions, right?
Yeah, and the owner, in the household,
and the owner or the household. Yeah, to limit our knowledge base and picking teams. In essence, balanced dog trainers are constantly seeking balance for their dogs.
Would you agree if I said, people listening, consider balanced dog training to mean neutral dog training? Okay. We're not here, we're not there. It's whatever the dog needs. It depends. I don't know. It depends on the situation. Right.
I think neutral doesn't, in my personal opinion, doesn't give me the best amount. Well, I get what you're saying. We're just not picking sides. Yeah. Neutral is definitely a better word than maybe the perceived, connotation of balanced, but, yeah, we're not picking sides. I think that's the most important thing.
It's okay. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not suggesting that we start coining training from here on out as neutral. For people listening, I like the term balanced dog. It just has that ring to it that it's kind of developed over time.
I think one thing I kind of want to just put out in the ether and see what happens. Let's go ahead and I'd like to refer to balanced dog training as a spectrum of training, right? So I have always looked at dog training as there's as many methods and philosophies and approaches to dog training as there are colors in the rainbow. Right. So ultimately is every practice and application of a technique or method can be done differently in many different degrees and in many different shades, if you will. And it's going to change based on the dog, the owner, the personality, the trainer, etc. Right. So in essence, in my mind, it's always looked like a color wheel or like a spectrum: blue, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And balanced dog trainers learn how to navigate that spectrum of dog training.
Right. And let me shameless plug you one more time. So I believe it was exactly 10 episodes ago. It was episode 2 or episode 3 that we talked about finding a way in which we can simplify and dial down a way for an owner to seek out information that would bring them to a program that would be sort of bespoke to their personal needs. Mm-hmm. Their dog taken into consideration, their situation taken into consideration, and all things considered, finances, location, like maybe there isn't a certain train, so I know that you and I have talked in the past about, and we're still working on this, guys, creating a program, a way to streamline all the endless information out there in order to find something that will realistically work for you in particular, not like a cookie cutter approach to dog training like we see too often.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, I just wanted to add, and this kind of segues a little into our next point of, a good balanced dog trainer. I completely agree that training overall exists on a spectrum. There's this, there's this, there's this. The only thing I wanted to add to it was, keep in mind, everyone, each individual training methodology. Let's say you're not a balanced dog trainer. Let's say you only believe in one method and you're just listening to this just to hear what's out there, which is great. Mm-hmm. If we have like any pure positive guys out there listening right now, even pure positive training in and of itself exists on a spectrum. I was working with a client today. I had 2 lessons today, and I worked with one client today in particular that we were doing strictly food work because it was our first lesson together and I wanted to shape behaviors. And their dog was so rambunctious that I had to be really quite precise with my, and I had to be like myself, almost a little more stoic in my motion to not overexcite the dog, and they're jumping and then I'm losing their focus. But as the lesson went on, it's hot out here, by the way. I'm in Arizona. It was like 150 today. So, Lord. So the dog like conked out pretty quick. And as he did, I had to turn up my energy a lot in order to keep the dog motivated. So even within one particular realm of training, there is that spectrum that you have to learn how to play with. And a balanced dog trainer knows how to do that within each particular method, and then knows how to do it with a few other methods at the same time. So it can be like, your food work looks like this within the food work, spectrum, but your other work looks like this within that particular spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. No, makes sense. Makes sense. And I think it's kind of learning the interpersonal workings of each method.
Right. Exactly.
How to communicate that method effectively to the dog.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.